right. Hey, everyone, welcome back. This is some bonus content that we're going to add to the webinar, the ACF Chef's Table webinar series. Not the one this week, but the week prior with Chef Michael Silver. There was just so much, and we had a lot of feedback that people wanted to hear more. And to be honest, I wanted to hear more too. There was everyone said there was so many tangents that were just so fascinating, and so we wanted to record some bonus content. This will get attached to on the YouTube channel and the website. I believe an email will go out. So with that said, let's turn things back over to Chef Michael Silver and sensory and how sensory perception affects food.
All right. Thank you, Chef. Appreciate it. So yeah, we kind of ran out of time and rushed through a few of the slides. So I wanted to just finish up some of the things that we weren't able to cover. So when last we met, we were talking about Booba and Kiki. And I gave you a list of different foods and asked you what you thought was Booba and which you thought was Kiki, and you got them all right. Booba and Kiki are made up words. But booba sounds like a kind of a round sound, and kiki
Right.
sounds like a sharp sound. And we associate foods naturally with roundness or sharpness, right? So some foods we think of as being angular, like carbonated foods, bitter foods, sour tasting foods, and things that are creamy or rich, sweeter, we tend to think of as being rounder. So that's why people naturally associate these shapes and these words with those types of foods. And this can, in practice, really change our perceptions of foods. And I got a great example of this, which is that years ago, Cadbury had a chocolate, is around a milk chocolate bar. And the mold shape was kind of angular, so you could break it into rectangles, and they were, kind of rectangular with sharpish corners. And Cadbury wanted to have the same size bar, but with a little less chocolate to just save a little money. So they changed the mold so that the rectangles were more rounded, and that meant just a slightly less amount of chocolate. The formulation of the chocolate was exactly the same. But what happened is a bunch of people wrote in and complained to Cadbury that they'd changed the formula and now it was too sweet. And that's because they saw, the rounded shape of the chocolate and it tasted sweeter to them, even though, again, it was the exact same chocolate.
Right.
So manufacturers will use curved fonts and curved logos for sweet products, and they'll use angular ones for foods that are more intense or sour. So, like, for example, if you look at logos on beer and carbonated water, most of those are going to be angular, not round. If you are sitting at an angular table or you have something on the table that is sharp or angular, it's going to make the foods taste more bitter to you than if it's you sitting at a round table or you have round plateware, things like that. Also, high-pitched, like tinkly sounds will make foods taste sweeter, and low-pitched brassy sounds will make foods taste more bitter or umami. So you can, again, change the taste of the food simply by the background music that's playing while people are eating it. And there was a study done by a researcher, Anne Sylvia Christnell, who tested this very thing. And she had people tasting bittersweet toffee while listening to either a high-pitched sort of sweet soundtrack or a low-pitched bitter one. And consistently the same toffee was rated as significantly sweeter or more bitter depending on the music that was playing. And these influences are very consistent across most people. The next area I want to talk about is every culture has foods that are delicious to them, but they may seem disgusting to people from another culture. So, for example, natto in Japan. For a lot of Americans, it has a very sharp aroma.
Yeah, I'm not.
You're not a fan, yeah.
Not a
So
fan.
I actually like natto. When I was in Japan recently, I tried to get it, whenever I could because it's hard to find good natto in the US, and I make my own natto from time to time. And the other thing about natto is it's very stringy, which it just a lot of people have trouble getting past that, uh,
Yeah, the sensory.
the texture of it. Yeah. So, but many people in Japan really love it and have it for breakfast every day or often in the morning. In the West, cheeses like blue cheese or Limburger are cheeses that we love, but people in another country might find them disgusting because it's basically rotted milk, right? In the Philippines, there's a condiment called bagum, which is basically fish scraps that are left over from cooking, and they just throw them in a pot and let them ferment. And it's very aromatic, but if you're used to that, it's a very strong, flavorful, it's a strong way to add flavor to dishes. And it can be really delicious if that's something you're used to. So all these different cultures and countries have these foods that they love. There's Sturström, a German food critic, said that the biggest challenge when eating it is to vomit only after the first bite as opposed to before. And have you ever had hákarl?
No.
So that is this Icelandic fermented shark, which is also notorious for being really hard to eat. Very few people are able to eat it, and it smells truly horrible.
And I've been to Iceland too. I've been to Iceland, and, all I had was $20 hamburgers when I was there.
Okay, well, that's good. So Anthony Bourdain tried this. He said it was the single worst thing he had ever put into his mouth. But if you actually are able to get past the smell and kind of let it dissolve in your mouth a little bit, um, it tastes, you may still not like it, but it tastes a lot better than the smell does. And there's a lot of foods, interesting, that may have a really terrible smell, but once you actually get them in your mouth, they have a really wonderful flavor. And like a lot of very strong cheeses are like that. They smell really bad, but once you're actually eating them, your taste perception changes quite a bit. And then there's other foods that are the other way, like coffee. We talked about coffee aroma earlier. Coffee is one of the most universally liked aromas that there is, but a lot of people, even though they like the smell of it, they don't like the taste of it. Right, and part of that is because of the bitterness, but there are other things that go into that. And a lot of times our perception of things is based also on our expectations, which can be influenced by how they're labeled. So if you take a food and you label it the exact same food and you label it smelly socks or you label it French cheese, then people's liking of it is going to be very different.
Right.
Right. So there's a lot of things that set our expectations, including orthonasal olfaction, which is when you smell something before you put it into your mouth. So some of these very stinky foods, if we don't smell them first and we just put them, maybe close our nose, put them into our mouth and taste them and then open our nose, we'll have a different perception than if we had smelled them first. And
Right.
that goes the opposite way as well, right? We can influence in a positive way uh, by various factors, how it looks, how it smells, cultural associations that we might have with it, pride, adaptation. There's a lot of different factors that go into this changing our taste perceptions uh, that have nothing to do with the actual technical flavor of the foods. And going back to smell as well, I talked about orthonasal olfaction when you smell something before you put it in your mouth. Retronasal olfaction, which is the smell that goes up through the back of your throat while you're actually eating the foods, you have the exact same nerves in your nose that are smelling, transmitting that smell to your brain. That if you smell it orthonasally versus retronasally, your brain processes and interprets those smells differently. And the orthonasal olfaction, your brain will sense it as a stronger smell than the exact same thing smelled retronasally. So it's fascinating because again, it's the same receptors exactly. It's just the way our brain is interpreting it. Any way that we can change in a positive way the expectations people have for food, it will change how much they like that food. And again,
So is
that
this like a job that somebody has at some of these big corporations or more than one person all about sensory perception? Like, is there somebody that looks at logos and shapes of cans and boxes and all these different things? And remember we were talking about the wrinkly bags.
Mhm.
Is this like a career
It
that somebody could?
absolutely is. Marketing is part of that, right? So marketing is getting people to buy your food, but marketing is also, it doesn't stop at you purchasing it, right? So your perception of the food is going to be influenced by the marketing and the packaging and the logo and the name of the food, and all those things are going to affect how it tastes to you. So, Steve Jobs was really big on the whole user experience when you first get a product and you open it, right? The unboxing experience is really important because that changes your perception of how much you like the product and how much you like using the product, even though you only do that one time, right? But so the same thing is true of food. All these things that can influence you in a positive way or give you a positive association with the food will influence how much you like it when you eat it and how willing you are or how likely you are to repurchase that same food. Yes, it's a good question. It's a big area, and in culinology and in food science and packaging and all that kind of stuff is absolutely an important career, and a lot of science goes into that, and a lot of user testing goes into that as well to see, what little things manufacturers can do to change perceptions. And with these really big companies like Kraft and Coca-Cola, a very small change in perception or packaging or logo or whatever can
Could
have
be
a big
huge,
influence on the
right?
bottom line.
Yeah, when you're talking about a company that is putting out millions or hundreds of thousands of a product, yeah,
Right.
I knew this was a thing. I just didn't realize the scope.
For a chef in a restaurant, they may not be selling millions of a product, but anything that they can do to improve the customer's experience with it, it's going to
Yeah.
change how much they like it when they're eating it. But even more importantly than that, when you're eating a meal in a restaurant, often people go together and they're talking and they may not be really focusing on the food, right? So the way that like the first bite and the last bite are going to be the most important. And a lot of the stuff in the middle, people don't remember what they ate or don't remember. Maya Angelou said that people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel, right? And that's just the same kind of thing here. If people have a positive experience with the food and their perceptions that they recall are positive, then it's going to influence their memory of the whole meal, even the things that they not really were focusing on when they were eating them. And they're going to be more likely to talk about the experience and go back. If you think back to some of the best meals you've had in your life, they were likely with people that you really enjoyed being with and you were having a great time, right? And that whole experience, or you went someplace really beautiful, you're in Italy or, somewhere. And, again, going back to this Provençal rosé paradox, where that whole experience so influences your experience with the food and your taste of the food. Something might, this is like the best thing I've ever eaten in your life. If you do the exact same thing in a restaurant in downtown Detroit, you might have a different experience with it. So the next thing I want to talk about is personalization. You have probably been to Starbucks some time in your life.
I have.
Okay. And they write your name on the cup,
Oh yeah. Mhm.
right? And you know why they do that?
Personalization.
Personalization. So Spence believes that it's not just so that you get the right coffee, but having your name on the cup personalizes it to you. And that improves your experience when you drink it. It will actually taste better to you because the cup has your name on it.
Yeah.
And so research has also shown that when people make their own food, or even just personalize food that someone else made, they enjoy it more. And this can even just be salting your food, right? A lot of restaurants don't ever have salt and pepper shakers on the table. Uh, some chefs feel like I seasoned this perfectly. You don't need to mess with it, right? But the problem with that is, A, it takes away the opportunity for this personalization, even in a very small way that can improve someone's experience with the food. But also, everyone's salt taste is different, right?
Different, correct.
I and probably you and a lot of chefs tend to like things a little bit more heavily seasoned than in the general population. So if I, as a chef, am salting it to my own liking, then that might be a little too salty for people. So anyway, personalization is super important. Anything that you can do to make people feel like the food is personalized to them is going to make an impact. And even, this is going to obviously be easy to do in a restaurant if you're making something for someone, and particularly if they ask for it a particular way. And so the chef makes it the way that they've asked for it, they're going to enjoy it more because of that. But in commercial foods, every chip bag and every soda can is the same. Well, Coca-Cola did this thing where they made all of these Coke cans with people's names on them, and so you could find the one with your name and buy that, right? And that was a huge success. And partly just the novelty of it, but also, again, this has my name on it. And so even though, they made millions of them, people it's personalized to them, and people's enjoyment of it increases because of that. Do you have a favorite mug that you like to drink your tea or coffee out of?
Oh, I do, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I have two too,
do
yeah.
okay. So what do they look like?
Okay, so one of them is a little bit bigger, and two of my kids, my two teenage boys that are now 16 and 19, when they were younger, we went to a pottery place and we made that mug, and the boys painted it, and it's got a handprint. It says, "I love you, Dad." So
Mm.
that will always be like one of my favorites. And then I have another one that we got at Universal Studios, and it's a Harry Potter, and it says, do you remember that map that I don't remember, it was called the Marauders map or
Oh, the bars,
something.
yeah,
It
yeah.
had the footsteps,
Mm.
and it says something like, "We solemnly swear we're up to no good," or something like that. So that was really cool mug. And again, that was a family trip with my wife and my kids there. So is that what that is
Well, this is
from a
the mug my wife got for me with I like peanuts, so it's all the different from the
Oh, I see, it's got
50s, the
Snoopy on it
60s,
all.
and 70s, um,
Yep.
on it. So, yeah, this idea of having a favorite mug or anything that is personal to you like that, there is a concept called self-prioritization. And so when something is linked to you specifically, your brain treats it differently. And there's a really interesting study done at Oxford where people were shown these random shapes, and some people would have a triangle assigned to them, or they might have had a square assigned to them or a circle. And then once they had a shape assigned to them, these random shapes would pop up on a screen, and they had to hit a button as fast as they could that matched whatever shape they saw on the screen. And what was so interesting about it is that people consistently recognized and reacted faster to their own shape, even though it was just assigned to them, a minute before. It has nothing to do with them. But once they made that association with them, their brain reacted to it faster.
That's so fascinating.
It is. And so, that
Wow.
again extends into the things like, the favorite mug. And that's also why, like, a birthday cake will taste better to the person having the birthday than we actually just went to a birthday party last night, and I cut the cake for everyone. And the person whose birthday it is, this is my cake, or this cake is for me. Charles Spence has he told me he has a mug that is it's orange with a pig on one side and a chicken on one side. And
Yeah.
so he looks for that cup every morning, and he gets annoyed if it's still in the dishwasher, right? I guess.
Right.
So, the coffee or tea or whatever you're drinking out of it is exactly the same, but it's going to taste better to you in your favorite mug. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is how the weight and the material and the shapes of dishes and tableware all
Oh
change
yeah.
how food
This will
tastes and how much it's enjoyed.
yeah, the my webinar guest this week brought this one up and how fascinating this was. Like the weight of the silverware and the types
Mhm.
of bowls and the weight of the bowl. Yeah.
Yeah, so
This
did
was
he
pretty
talk about the study with the yogurt and the different weighted bowls?
No, no, no. He just brought up about how fascinating this the whole subject was and how he never thought about until he watched our webinar
Mhm.
last week and he just loved it and he was like, "Man, like I wish I was in the room with you guys. I would have loved to
Mm.
have been part of that."
Yeah,
I think you would have liked him too. Like if you get a chance, watch this week's
I will watch it.
about language, you know?
Mhm.
Like you were talking about Bobo and Kiki and that
Mhm.
is right along the type of stuff he was talking about too. So that these both these webinars were so linked. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I will definitely watch it, and I will probably send him an email. So they have done a lot of studies with cutlery and dishes and plates and bowls and stuff like that. One study that they did with cutlery, it was 150 people, and the when the cutlery was heavier, and this is crazy. I don't understand this, but when the cutlery was heavier, people thought that the food on the plate had been plated more artistically, and they were willing to pay significantly more for it, even though it was the same food, on the same
Played the
day,
same way.
same dining room,
Yeah.
with lighter silverware. And the heavier silverware also improves the taste of the food for you. So,
Yeah.
every time I go to a restaurant with that cheap stamped silverware, I think about these studies. Concorde, when they were flying, every gram that was on the plane mattered, right? So they wanted to have this really high-end experience, and so they designed this set of this beautiful titanium cutlery, and it was very expensive and super elegant and light and beautiful, and the passengers hated it because to them it felt cheap and flimsy, and again, it made the food taste worse to them and their experience worse with them.
Yeah.
So they never ended up using it.
And it was all because it was lighter.
And it's all because it's lighter. And things
Yeah.
that are heavier make, if you buy a product, really almost any product, and it feels really heavy, you're gonna like it more.
It
And
feels like it's more quality. Yeah.
yeah, and that's a problem, especially in packaged foods, right? Because weight is costs a lot of money when you're shipping stuff and packaging it all. So manufacturers have to decide between the experience being improved by the weight and the cost of the food going up with the weight. And this is true again with electronics and other things as well. So a lot of times manufacturers will make the decision to go ahead and have something be heavier. I have these, I just happen to have sitting right in front of me on the experiments I'm doing. I have these little metal beakers that I use. I have stainless steel, and I have, uh, you can't tell, but this is very heavy. This beaker is also filled with something that I'm experimenting with. And I have beakers that are almost identical, but they're much thinner.
Which one?
And I don't use those ones. I like this a nice heavy beaker.
Yeah.
So probably it makes absolutely no difference in how the experiment will turn out, but, we tend naturally like things that are heavy. And they did
Yeah.
this experiment where they had 3 bowls of yogurt that they wanted people to taste and see which one they liked the best. And so they set this up so people would have, these 3 yogurts which looked exactly the same, and the bowls looked exactly the same. And so they'd pick up the first yogurt and try it and, evaluate it and then put it down, take the second one, the third one. And consistently, people preferred one of the 3 yogurts. And the yogurt was actually identical in all 3 bowls. And
Yeah.
again, the bowls looked identical. But the difference was that they had weighted one of the bowls to be heavier, which you couldn't see. But because it was heavier, when people ate it, they thought it was richer and creamier, and they preferred it to the other ones.
That's still wild.
Yeah. And kind of, in a sort of related topic I thought was interesting, there have been studies that show that cheese tastes saltier if you eat it off of a knife than off of a fork, and
Really?
yogurt tastes sweeter if you eat it with a white spoon over a black spoon.
That's wild.
Yeah. So, this is kind of a whirlwind tour through all these different things. There's a lot behind all of these studies, but I hope that people really just kind of think about how important all these things are and really are very deliberate in choices that they make. Especially if you're setting up a restaurant or you have an opportunity to remodel it or make some changes, a lot of these things are very inexpensive to do.
Yeah.
Just lightening the mood of people, you, you know, people when you go in a restaurant and people greet you right away and they're very friendly, especially if it's a place where you frequent more than once and they recognize you. There was a Italian restaurant that's been out of business for a long time that my wife and it was in another city from where we lived, but when we visit there, we would go to this one restaurant, and we went there one year, and we had a great meal, and the couple that owned it was just super friendly and wonderful, and they were, like, going around to every table and saying hello to people, and the woman would sit down and chat with them or whatever, and we went back a year later, and they remembered us, and,
Yeah.
that kind of experience just really elevates the the food and your liking of the meal and your wanting to go back. So now that you've had all this information, you can understand why we started off with this apple, right? And why you like a particular apple. And you had mentioned crunchiness and sweetness, right? So you now know how important crunchiness is. It's one of the most liked organoleptic properties of foods is crunchiness. And so that's going to heighten your enjoyment of the apple, even though the taste is exactly the same, whether it's crunchy or mushy or not so crunchy. You know that a red apple, red will make it taste sweeter because you see that it's red. You also know that a red apple is booba, right? And a tart green apple is kiki. If you eat an apple in an apple orchard, it will probably taste better and sweeter to you. If you eat it on an airplane, it's gonna be less sweet because of the engine noise. So there's all these different factors that go into a food, even as simple as that, right?
We talked about this last week or this week. Uh, 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 he was talking about Americans when asked about or pears. It was pears, and most Americans would say things like crisp and sweet were those were the descriptors that almost everybody
Mhm.
across the board used. Things like crisp and sweet. And then, but when they asked Japanese people, it was fragrant and soft. And and then he was talking about in that language there was dozens of words for crisp, and
Mhm.
each one was a very specific type. It denoted a very specific type of crisp. So
Yeah,
it's
it's like how Japanese have 20 different ways of counting different things, right?
yeah,
All these
yeah,
different words for how you count, a pencil, something that's long and thin or something that's round or whatever. So,
yeah.
yeah, and
This is
cultures that
all
have all these different words, like that, that granularity is gonna be important.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these all of these things you talked about, like a lot of these are very simple things for a restaurant owner or manager to do as long as they're thinking about them and they're aware of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, use heavy, nice silverware, lighten people's moods, be friendly and make them chuckle. Play music that complements the food that you're serving, not too loud, and let them use salt if they want,
Yeah, right.
right? So, yeah, so hopefully this is useful to people. It's a fascinating area of science. And I mean, it's fascinating in its own right, but there's so many takeaways that can really help us improve people's experience with the food that we make.
For sure. This has been there's so many different tangents we could go on. Well, no, I can't wait to have a Bloody Mary on a plane. The next time I fly, I'm gonna have one
Yeah.
because I keep thinking
Well, have
that
one
one.
on the
You
ground
know,
first and really think about what
I
it
have
tastes like, and then have one on a plane and see how it's
most never
different.
have one. I asked uh, uh, my foster mother. We spoke the other day, and I was like, "Hey, do you have a cocktail that you drink whenever you fly?" And she goes, "Yeah, actually, I do." I said, "What is it?" And she said, "A Bloody Mary." And um, I said, "Well, do you ever drink it any other time?" And she was like, "Never."
Okay. Awesome. That's a perfect
So,
ending to this.
yeah, I thought that was crazy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it really
but
is.
all right. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for doing this. For those of you that are watching this, this is bonus content it's been added to last week's webinar. And again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Next week, we'll have Chef Vanessa Marquise. She's going to talk about childhood nutrition, and that's one everybody needs to watch, especially if you have kids. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Chef Silver.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate it.